Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
It's funny how families work. You can break your back for them, carry their weight for years, keep your mouth shut through every petty jab and backhanded compliment, and still end up being the one they all laugh about behind your back. I wasn't supposed to see that message, not directly at least. I wasn't even in the group chat, which was already telling. But of course, things have a way of circling back, especially when people start getting a little too comfortable thinking you'll never speak up. Claire, my sister-in-law and the unofficial queen bee of Dean's side of the family, didn't even bother hiding it. She told the others in the group chat, the one I wasn't in, that I shouldn't be invited to Thanksgiving this year. Her exact words were, "I love Laura, but let's be honest, she kind of ruins the vibe." I found out through my niece, Ellie. Poor kid, she wasn't supposed to show me her phone, but she was upset. She thought it was wrong. She showed me the message, trying to scroll past it quickly, but I saw enough. There was laughter, emoji reactions, Claire typing LOL like she was writing to a sorority sister, and even Dean's mother replying, "I know what you mean." And Dean? He didn't say a word in there, not one sentence, not even a weak defense. That silence? That hit harder than Claire's petty little comment. Silence is agreement when it comes from someone who knows the truth and chooses to sit on it. I stared at that message for a long time. Long enough for Ellie to start nervously fiddling with her sleeves. I just handed her back the phone and said, "Thanks for showing me, honey." That's all. No drama. No outburst. Just a quiet, cold burn that settled in my chest like a stone. I went back home that night and sat in the kitchen with the lights off, just me and the hum of the fridge and a glass of cheap red wine I hadn't even planned to drink. I looked around at the house I kept spotless for people who never noticed. Remembered the years I scrubbed dishes after every holiday while Claire took selfies and Dean's mom poured praise all over her Pinterest-perfect side dishes. I remembered the Christmas Eve when Claire forgot to bring the ham and blamed the store for being out, and I drove 40 minutes in the snow to pick one up so the kids wouldn't go without dinner. Or the 4th of July when I brought the folding chairs, packed the cooler, baked the damn pie, and then was told my outfit was a little frumpy for photos. Every year, I bit my tongue and smiled for the family picture while Claire posed front and center like some kind of lifestyle magazine cover. But this was different. This was them saying, out loud, that I didn't belong. That I was optional. That I wasn't just unloved, I was unwanted. And as much as I wanted to say I was shocked, I wasn't. Not really. It just clarified something I think I'd known for a long time, but had refused to admit to myself. They never saw me as family. I was a seat filler. A background character in their little curated family holidays. The reliable one who cooked, cleaned, and never caused a scene. Until now. It was around midnight when I walked into the hallway, barefoot on the cold tile, and opened the bottom drawer of Dean's old desk. I reached to the back where I kept all our important documents, passports, insurance forms, property records, and pulled out the yellow envelope marked Deed, Pine Lake Cabin. It was heavier than I remembered, or maybe that was just me finally feeling the weight of what it meant. That cabin wasn't some family heirloom passed down from Dean's grandparents, like everyone always assumed. It wasn't owned jointly. It wasn't co-signed. It wasn't even technically ours. I bought that cabin 15 years ago with the small inheritance I got from my mom. Dean knew, but he never told his family. Probably because letting them think it was a family asset kept things easier, more harmonious, and God forbid Dean ever deal with confrontation. I paid every mortgage bill on that place, stocked it before every holiday, kept the utilities on year-round, and cleaned up every time someone left spilled wine on the carpet or forgot to take the trash out after a weekend stay. And no one ever asked. No one ever wondered why the taxes came in my name or why I had the only key to the locked supply closet. They just assumed it was theirs because it always had been, like a family tradition that appeared out of nowhere, permanent and unquestioned. I stood there for a long time with that deed in my hand, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I thought about Claire's smug little laugh, about Sue's agreement, about Dean looking at his phone while sitting 2 feet away from me and saying nothing. I thought about every year I smiled through their crap and told myself I was doing it for the sake of family. And then I asked myself a question I hadn't dared ask before. What if this year I did something for myself? It wasn't rage. Not even spite. It was clarity, sharp, cold, and quiet. The kind that makes you stop second-guessing and start acting. I walked into the kitchen, poured the rest of the wine down the sink, and opened my laptop. There was a realtor's email sitting in my inbox from a few weeks ago. She had left a message after hearing the cabin might be coming up for sale soon. Someone she knew was interested in lakefront properties. I had ignored it at the time. But now? Now I clicked reply. And I typed 7 simple words. I'm ready to talk about selling. There's something oddly liberating about watching a lie unravel, not the kind shouted in the middle of an argument, not the kind you catch on someone's face when they slip up mid-sentence, but the quiet, ongoing, inherited sort of lie that everybody believes because it's easier than asking questions that might cause discomfort. That cabin had always been treated like a family treasure, as if it were carved out of shared memories and passed down through bloodlines. A little rustic slice of togetherness wrapped in plaid blankets, mismatched mugs, and half-hearted cleanup efforts. But the truth is that it was mine. It always had been mine, and the only reason no one knew or ever bothered to ask was because I let the story grow legs and walk into their version of the family myth without protest. I thought it didn't matter. I thought that giving people space to feel comfortable, welcome, and entitled was a form of generosity. Turns out, it was just a great way to end up forgotten. 15 years ago, when my mother died, she left behind very little, no sprawling estate or stock portfolio, just a modest savings account and a few personal items that carried more emotion than monetary value. Among the few things she did leave was a final, handwritten note folded inside her old jewelry box, which read, "Get something that's yours. Only yours. Something no one can take or ruin." It hit me harder than I expected at the time, mostly because my mother had spent her entire life pouring herself into everyone else, into a husband who never noticed, into kids who rarely called, and into a job that didn't even bother sending flowers to her funeral. That line stuck in my head like a splinter, and after the grief started to settle, I found myself scouring listings for small, affordable cabins somewhere not too far, but far enough to feel like escape. Pine Lake was the third one I visited, and the moment I stepped onto the porch and looked out over the still water, I knew this was it. I signed the papers alone, made the down payment from my inheritance, and had the deed put solely in my name. It wasn't a secret. I just never corrected the assumptions. Dean had been supportive enough, if indifferent. He didn't offer to split the cost, didn't object to me owning it myself, and didn't seem particularly moved when I told him why I was doing it. He said something like, "It'll be nice to have a place to go," and that was the end of it. From the start, the cabin became a refuge, not just from work or the city, but from noise, from roles I didn't ask for, from the weight of being the responsible one in every damn scenario. But slowly, year by year, visit by visit, that cabin started to feel less like mine and more like a stage set for other people's memories. They took pictures for their social feeds, left their clutter behind like it was a hotel, invited their friends without asking, and began referring to it as the family cabin, like I was just another attendee. That realtor's name was Wendy. She'd left me a voicemail weeks ago, her tone chipper and polite, asking if I might be ready to sell, if the rumors she'd heard about the place changing hands were true. At the time, I'd laughed it off, thinking, not a chance. But now her email sat in front of me, and my fingers hovered over the keys with a strange sense of calm, not rage, not pettiness, just decision. I replied with a single sentence confirming my interest, and within 15 minutes, she was calling my cell with details about market values, comparable properties, and a potential buyer who'd been sniffing around that part of the lake for a retirement getaway. Apparently, places like Pine Lake didn't come up often, and when they did, people jumped fast. I scheduled a meeting. Just like that. No family meeting. No warning. The next morning, while the smell of coffee filled the kitchen and Dean scrolled through his phone like nothing was happening, I walked over to the junk drawer, pulled out the spare key to the cabin, and slipped it into my purse. I told him I was heading up to do a little cleaning before the holiday weekend, nothing unusual, and he didn't even look up. That's when I realized just how invisible I'd become in my own life. I drove up alone, watching the road curve through the trees, and by the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, I knew there was no turning back. The cabin greeted me like an old friend that had aged while I wasn't looking. The wood smelled like pine and damp leaves, the kind of scent that wraps around your lungs and reminds you you're not in the city anymore. I stepped inside and just stood there for a moment, staring at the stone fireplace and the worn rug we bought from a garage sale the year after we moved in. Every corner held echoes, quiet laughter, kids running with marshmallows stuck to their fingers, boots left by the door, board games missing half their pieces, all layered with the soft hum of resentment I'd been too tired to name. I walked through each room with a garbage bag, collecting broken decorations, empty candle jars, half-used shampoos people had left in the shower like it was some Airbnb they didn't have to clean. And in the middle of the living room, I found a handwritten list on the coffee table, scrawled in Claire's handwriting, with the title Holiday Content Ideas, Photos She Wanted to Take for Thanksgiving, lighting setups, shot angles, hashtags scribbled in the margins. Apparently, she'd been planning a full photo shoot again, complete with table settings and kids in coordinated flannel. The arrogance of it made me laugh. Here was a woman who had gone out of her way to exclude me from Thanksgiving, not knowing she'd be showing up to a locked cabin with a for sale sign out front. She never even stopped to ask whose name was on the deed, because people like Claire don't ask questions, they assume ownership the moment something looks pretty and fits into their curated world. I took a deep breath, stepped outside, and stood on the porch as the wind moved through the trees like whispers. I looked out at the lake, that still, mirror-like water that had seen years of my quiet suffering, and I felt something shift. Not joy exactly, just relief. The relief of finally seeing people for who they are and deciding, without apology, that you're done playing your part in their show. As I drove back home that night, the sun setting behind me, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother-in-law. It read, "Hey, just checking to see what time you're heading up to the cabin next week. We're bringing pies this year." I stared at it for a full minute before responding. No one's heading to the cabin this year. And then I added, without explanation, I sold it. It didn't even take an hour after I sent that text before all hell broke loose, and honestly, I had expected outrage, maybe a flurry of calls or a dramatic voicemail or two. But what I didn't anticipate was just how quickly the whole Barnes family would turn into a full-blown crisis committee, digital pitchforks and all, assembling in the one place they feel most powerful on their phones. Behind the safety of a family group chat where loyalty is performative, outrage is contagious, and hypocrisy hides under the veil of tradition. They didn't bother calling me directly, of course, because confrontation in this family only flows in one direction, down, from those who assume authority onto those who are expected to absorb it quietly. So instead, they turned to the digital stage they knew I wasn't part of, the place where they thought they could control the narrative without interference, except this time, their little echo chamber couldn't contain the mess they'd made. I didn't see the initial messages, not firsthand. But it took less than 30 minutes for screenshots to start making their way to me from Ellie again, her apologies tucked between every image she forwarded like a buffer against the guilt she clearly felt for being caught in the middle. The thread started civil enough, Claire, predictably, leading the charge, demanding to know if what I'd said was some kind of joke, because surely, no one would sell the family cabin, the sacred centerpiece of every carefully staged holiday, the backdrop of countless photos and years of half-remembered toasts, without at least offering everyone a chance to weigh in. Then came the accusations, her tone hardening by the minute, calling me selfish, accusing me of choosing drama over family, even suggesting that I'd waited for the perfect moment to ruin the most important holiday of the year. Like some cartoon villain who plotted for months in silence, clutching a deed and cackling in the shadows. What stunned me wasn't Claire's reaction. I'd expected that, maybe even invited it by saying nothing for so long and then pulling the rug out from under her with a single sentence. No, what hit hardest was the sheer speed with which the rest of them followed her lead, falling into line like scared little soldiers, eager to avoid her judgment by echoing it. Dean's mom, Sue, chimed in next, writing something along the lines of, I just don't understand why Laura would do this without discussing it. This affects all of us, and it just feels so cruel. Cruel. That was the word she used. After years of me quietly making beds, preparing food, unclogging toilets after someone's kid flushed a toy, and cleaning up shattered wine glasses while Claire posed on the dock for pictures, she never once asked if she could take their cruel. As if kindness only counts when it stays invisible. And then came the kicker. Brad, Claire's husband, the golden boy of the family, tried to play mediator, dropping in with a "let's all take a breath." Claire was just venting the other day. She didn't mean anything by it, which only served to confirm what I already knew. That message, the one that started this all, where Claire called me a vibe killer, wasn't a slip of the tongue, wasn't taken out of context, wasn't a private thought shared in confidence. It was part of a conversation, maybe even a consensus, and Brad's weak defense only made it worse, like putting a band-aid on a severed limb. Because the truth is, they didn't just exclude me, they laughed while doing it. They had fun mocking the woman who made their holidays run smoothly, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who made sure every kid had a stocking even when their own parents forgot. Dean stayed quiet for hours, which didn't surprise me anymore. I don't think it was guilt. I think it was paralysis, the same kind that overtakes people when the person they rely on to keep the peace suddenly decides they're done keeping it. When he finally did speak, it was in the form of a lukewarm text directly to me. "Hey, everyone's really upset. Maybe we can find a way to rent the cabin back for the weekend? Just to smooth things over." That was it. No apology. No defense. No question about how I was feeling or why I made the decision. Just a quiet request to preserve the illusion a little longer, to keep the Instagram-perfect gathering intact for another year. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I was sitting in silence in the living room, a different kind of silence than the one I'd known for years, the kind that used to sit heavy on my chest, built from years of being talked over, dismissed, and used for convenience. No, this silence was clean. It was mine. And as I stared out the window at the late autumn sky and the bare branches swaying like slow dancers in the wind, I realized how calm I felt. Not satisfied, not triumphant, just still, like someone who'd finally dropped the weight they didn't realize they were carrying. Later that night, my phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't Dean or Claire or Sue. It was Brad. A direct message. The screen lit up with his name, and beneath it, a single sentence that stopped me mid-step. "Please don't sell. I'll tell you something Claire doesn't want you to know." I stared at that message for a long time, watching the typing bubbles come and go as if he was weighing whether to say more, and something in my gut told me this wasn't just about Claire being mean or dramatic. There was something else, something deeper, maybe even uglier, buried beneath the curated smiles and the holiday traditions. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider trying to fit into their family dynamic. I felt like the one holding the truth, finally standing still while they scrambled to control a narrative they never actually owned. I didn't reply immediately. I wanted him to sit with the weight of that offer, to feel the shift in power that was starting to unfold. Because the thing about secrets is they rot. And the more perfect people try to look, the more terrifying it becomes when their mask begins to slip. And in that moment, as I stood in the quiet of my own house, watching shadows stretch across the hardwood floors, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. There's a very specific kind of silence that comes after someone offers you a secret. It's not the peaceful, meditative kind, not the quiet that lulls you into calm, but a tense, suspended stillness. Like standing on the edge of a frozen lake and waiting for the ice to crack under your feet. When Brad sent that message, "Please don't sell. I'll tell you something Claire doesn't want you to know," I didn't reply right away, not because I wasn't curious, but because I wanted him to feel the weight of his own desperation. The man who'd sat beside Claire through every snide comment, who'd laughed when I handed out dishes or carried firewood or rewashed a sink full of cloudy wine glasses without complaint, was now extending an olive branch, thin, trembling, and possibly rotting from the inside out. I knew better than to trust him, but something in his message tugged at the corner of my curiosity like a thread I couldn't leave alone. The next morning, I told Dean I was meeting a friend for coffee, though I didn't mention it was Brad. He didn't ask. He was barely speaking, his form of protest being silent, sulking paired with exaggerated sighs and awkward hovering, like he wanted me to acknowledge his discomfort without him having to name it. I didn't entertain it. If there was ever a time I was done soothing other people's emotions while mine boiled beneath the surface, it was now. I met Brad at a generic coffee chain 2 towns over, far enough from home that we wouldn't run into any familiar faces, and neutral enough that it gave us both the illusion of safety. He was already seated when I arrived, hunched over a paper cup, tapping his foot so hard the table rattled slightly. When he saw me, he stood up with the kind of sheepish energy that reminded me of a teenager about to confess to breaking a window, except this window, I suspected, was bigger and a hell of a lot messier. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. There was no, "How have you been?" no, "I'm sorry about what Claire said," no acknowledgement of the fact that he had, until recently, been fully complicit in the same dynamic that had pushed me to the edge. Instead, he leaned in, dropped his voice low, and said, "Look, I don't agree with how Claire handled things. She gets caught up sometimes. But this whole cabin situation? There's something you should know before you go through with it." I folded my arms and waited, saying nothing. I wanted him to feel the pressure build. "She's been making money off it," he said finally, the words tumbling out with the urgency of someone who'd practiced them in the mirror, but still wasn't sure if saying them aloud was a good idea. "Not a lot, but enough. Brand deals, sponsorships, that kind of thing. She's been using the cabin for content, posting photos, tagging brands, doing little holiday moments things on Instagram and TikTok. And she's getting paid for it. She never told anyone, not even her agent. She made it seem like it was her property. Called it, 'Our family place in Pine Lake' in all her captions. Used it to sell throw pillows and fake rustic candles to people who think she's the second coming of Martha Stewart." I didn't blink. I just stared at him, letting the words land where they may, though internally I felt the familiar rush of heat rise to my ears, the kind that comes not from shock, but from confirmation. I had known, somewhere deep in my bones, that Claire's constant photo sessions weren't just about vanity or memory-making. There had always been something transactional in her enthusiasm, something curated and polished and hollow. But I had never imagined she was turning a profit off my property, never imagined that those perfectly lit photos of her kids sipping hot cocoa on my porch or her hands arranging charcuterie boards on my table were part of a monetized lie. "She was planning to rent it out this winter," Brad continued, clearly riding the momentum of confession now. "Just for a few weekends, maybe over Christmas. Said it would cover gifts and offset holiday expenses. She was going to list it quietly through a friend, under another name. I told her it was risky, that she should ask you, but she said you wouldn't mind. Said you'd never say no because you never do." That was the sentence that did it, that final nail that pierced through years of patience and self-denial. Because she wasn't wrong. I hadn't said no. Not once. I'd swallowed every comment, every inconvenience, every act of casual dismissal with the belief that kindness meant being unshakable, that generosity meant not keeping score, that being the better person required enduring things that hurt, as long as you did it with grace. And what had that gotten me? A reputation for being a pushover. A target for manipulation. A background character in someone else's show. I stood up then, without touching my coffee. Brad looked at me like he wasn't sure if he should follow or hide under the table. I leaned in close, just enough to make sure he heard me clearly over the ambient noise of the cafe, and said, "Thank you for telling me. But the cabin isn't up for sale. It's already sold. The papers were signed yesterday." He looked stunned, like he thought he still had time to change the ending, like confessing Claire's sins had bought him a chance at redemption. But redemption doesn't come cheap, and it sure as hell doesn't come without sincerity. I walked out without looking back. In the parking lot, the cold hit me like a slap, sharp, bracing, real. I sat in the car for a moment before pulling out my phone and calling Wendy, the realtor. She picked up immediately, cheerful as always, her voice full of practiced optimism. I told her to raise the listing price. She hesitated, saying it was already under contract. I told her to ask the buyer if they'd be willing to match a higher offer. She promised to follow up. I didn't care if they did or didn't. What mattered was that Claire would find out. That for the first time, she would be excluded from the loop, left out of the decision, and forced to accept that something she had taken for granted was no longer hers to claim. And when I got home, Dean was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He looked like he'd been rehearsing a confrontation, building it in his head while pacing from room to room. "Are you really doing this?" he asked, voice flat but loaded with unspoken tension. I didn't hesitate. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I already did." Then I walked past him and poured myself a glass of wine, not out of celebration, not even defiance, but out of necessity, like someone reclaiming the smallest corner of their life and daring anyone to question whether they deserve it. Because for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't waiting to be included. I was finally the one drawing the line. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a kind of silence that felt intentional, as though the day itself had taken a breath and chosen not to speak unless spoken to, and for the first time in over a decade, there was no frantic packing. No backseat arguments about forgotten pie tins or cranberry sauce jars left in the fridge, no trunk loaded with blankets and board games, no barking dog running in circles as I tried to herd the chaos into a semblance of departure. There was just stillness, the kind that reaches deep into your bones and asks whether you're sure you made the right call, not out of guilt but out of habit, because being a woman in this family had always meant second-guessing yourself even when you were right. And yet, as I stood in my living room, wrapped in a bathrobe, the smell of coffee curling through the air like a soft ribbon, I felt no pang of regret, only an eerie sense of peace that I hadn't known I was capable of finding. The cabin was gone. Not hypothetically, not in a few weeks, not pending inspection. It was gone, sold, signed, and sealed. The new owners were an older couple from Oregon who had been looking for a quiet lakeside place to retire. Someone, Wendy said, had fallen in love with the porch the moment they saw the photos. I'd received their offer within 48 hours of listing it, and the deal moved quickly, almost too quickly, as if the universe had been sitting with its arms crossed, waiting for me to finally act in my own interest for once, and the moment I did, it swept everything into place like falling dominoes. The final paperwork had been signed 2 days before Thanksgiving. I hadn't told anyone, hadn't sent out a group message or offered explanations, because after years of being the one to explain, coordinate, and apologize, I'd finally realized I didn't owe them anything, not a notice, not a heads up, not even a goodbye. The group chat had gone almost completely quiet since Brad's failed attempt to broker peace, or at least to bargain for time, and I hadn't received a single direct message from Claire since the screenshots stopped coming. Sue had called once, left a brief voicemail, tight-lipped and measured, saying something about being disappointed in how things were handled and hoping we could talk when things settled down. I hadn't returned the call. Dean, meanwhile, had moved into a sort of emotional purgatory where his body remained present in our home, but his mind lingered somewhere between disapproval and resignation, unwilling to fight, but equally unable to accept the shift in dynamic that was now undeniably permanent. He watched me like someone studying a new species, trying to decide whether to approach or retreat, and I let him, offering no invitation either way. I spent the morning with the blinds half closed and the television on mute, flipping through old black and white films I'd seen a dozen times before, their familiar dialogue drifting faintly into the room while I microwaved leftover Chinese food and poured myself a glass of wine at 11 in the morning. There was no table to set, no centerpiece to fluff, no forced smiles or mandatory hugs, and I realized, with something that felt dangerously close to joy, that I didn't miss any of it. Not the rituals. Not the performance. Not the illusion of closeness we'd all worked so hard to maintain, even as it rotted from the inside out. And for the first time, I let myself wonder whether they missed me or whether they missed what I did for them. Somewhere around noon, the group chat woke up. Claire posted a vague complaint, no names, of course, just something like, "Some people will always put themselves first, even if it ruins everything for everyone else," paired with a photo of her and her kids sitting on a couch at what looked like a hotel lobby. A sad store-bought pie on the table in front of them, no lake in sight, no fireplace crackling in the background. The photo felt strained, The kind of thing someone posts when they're trying to pretend that plan B was the plan all along. I didn't respond. Neither did Dean, though I noticed his jaw tighten slightly when he saw the post. A few minutes later, Brad sent a private message. She says you won. But I don't think it's about winning. He was right. It wasn't about winning. It never was. It was about not losing myself in a family that only valued me for the services I provided, for the role I played in propping up their fantasy of what a holiday, what a marriage, what a perfect family should look like. It was about reclaiming something I should have never given away so easily, my time, my space, my name on that deed. I had let them take it all piece by piece, year after year, until I became the invisible scaffolding behind their smiling group photos. And when I finally stepped out of the frame, they didn't know how to stand on their own. Dean came into the living room a little after 2, holding his phone like it weighed more than it should. He sat down beside me, not touching, just sitting, the way people do when they want to bridge a gap without pretending it isn't there. He looked at the muted television, then at me, then finally said, "They hate you right now." His voice wasn't accusing. It was observational, like someone reading a weather report. I didn't answer right away. I took a sip of wine, still warm from my hand, and turned my gaze back to the television. Then I said, "But I don't." That hung between us for a long time, long enough that I could feel the weight of it settle in the room, shifting the air like smoke. He didn't say anything else. He didn't apologize. He didn't take sides. And maybe that was his way of surviving, of staying small enough to avoid being blamed. But in that moment, it felt like an echo of every other moment he hadn't stood beside me when it counted. I didn't ask him to change. I just stopped waiting for him to. Later that evening, I posted nothing. No photos. No status updates. No cryptic quotes about growth or boundaries or starting over. I let the silence speak for me. I didn't need to justify myself to people who had only seen what they wanted to see, and I certainly wasn't going to start now. But as I stood by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in streaks of gold and gray, I couldn't help but wonder, had I gone too far? Had I crossed some line between self-respect and vengeance, between protecting myself and punishing them? Would this be the decision I looked back on in 10 years with pride, or with a quiet ache of regret? I don't know. And maybe that's the most honest thing I can say. Because sometimes, doing what's right for you doesn't feel triumphant. It feels complicated and messy and uncertain. It feels like choosing peace over approval. And when you've spent your entire adult life being the one who makes sure everything goes smoothly, choosing yourself can look an awful lot like betrayal to the people who benefited from your silence. But if they want their cabin memories, they'll have to make new ones somewhere else. Without me.